Imagine this. You're a respected judge, driving through your own neighborhood, in your own car, when suddenly you're pulled over by a police officer who assumes you've stolen it. What would you do? Even with your title, even with your years of service, you're treated like a criminal because of the color of your skin. And when the truth comes out, what do you think that officer will say? Will there be an apology or just a shrug? This true and shocking story will make you question, how often does this happen? And what does justice really look like? Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you tuning in from today? And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that demand reflection. Isaiah brushed a speck of dust off the dashboard of his brand new Lexus. It was only a week old, but already he treated it like a trophy. The leather seats still smelled like the factory. The engine purred with the kind of smoothness that said, "You've made it." He had just left the courthouse. Another long day of back-to-back hearings, heavy decisions, and endless paperwork. The kind of work that drained your energy, but reminded you why you do it. Now, driving through the wide, tree-lined streets of Winterdale, Michigan, he could finally breathe. This was his favorite part of the day. The calm, the quiet, the sense of control. The homes were grand, set far back from the road. It all looked peaceful, but peace, it turned out, was temporary. Just as Isaiah started humming to the mellow jazz on the radio, flashing red and blue lights lit up behind him. His heart sank. He glanced in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser, its headlights sharp, unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat, fingers tightened instinctively around the steering wheel. He pulled over without hesitation, confused but calm. This was a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of the city. He hadn't been speeding. In fact, he'd been taking his time, savoring the peaceful drive after a long, exhausting week. What could he have possibly done wrong? A sudden, sharp knock on the window shattered the quiet. Isaiah turned. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stood there, her face unreadable, her hand resting far too casually on the holster at her hip. "License and registration," she snapped. No greeting, no explanation. Isaiah nodded silently, reaching slowly toward the glove box. He moved carefully, deliberately, because he knew how fast things could go wrong. The officer, her nameplate read Rhodes, snatched the documents from his hands, never meeting his eyes. She scanned the papers, her gaze flicking sharply between the ID and Isaiah. Her expression darkened. "Step out of the car," Isaiah blinked. "Excuse me?" "Out! Now!" Her voice was iron. And this time, there was no room for misunderstanding. Isaiah hesitated. His mind raced to make sense of what was happening. He was a judge, a respected one. He had likely presided over cases involving Officer Rhodes' own department. This was Winterdale, his community, his home, a place where he was known by name, by title, by legacy. And yet, here he was, treated like a suspect, like a stranger. "Ma'am, there must be some misunderstanding," he said, keeping his voice calm and measured. "I'm Judge Isaiah Carr. This is my car and I live just down the street." Officer Rhodes raised an eyebrow. Her hand shifted, barely, but noticeably closer to her gun. "Step out, now!" Isaiah swallowed the rising indignation. He knew better than to escalate. Not here, not now. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, standing tall beside his Lexus, trying to maintain the dignity they were stripping from him. Rhodes circled him slowly, like a predator sizing up a threat. "I've had reports of a vehicle like this, stolen last week," she said, her eyes narrowing like she'd already reached a verdict. Isaiah's jaw clenched. "This is my car. I purchased it from the dealership just a few days ago. If you run the plates, they'll come back clean." She didn't seem to hear him, or maybe she just didn't care. "Hands on the hood," she barked, stepping closer. Isaiah took a breath. "This is unnecessary," he said, his voice still steady but his patience wearing thin. "I've done nothing wrong." Officer Rhodes' eyes flickered with something Isaiah couldn't quite place. Suspicion or something darker. "You're going to do as I say," she said, her voice like steel, "or we'll have a problem." Isaiah's blood ran hot, but he held it in. He knew better. He wasn't just another man on the street. He was Judge Isaiah Carr. He knew the law. He upheld the law. And yet, in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. With a steady breath, he complied, slowly placing his hands on the hood of his car, fingers spread, palms burning with frustration. From the corner of his eye, he saw the neighborhood watching, curtains shifting, silhouettes behind windows. The shame cut deeper than the fear. This was his street. These were his neighbors. And now they were seeing him like this. The weight of it pressed down on him, not the hands of the law, but the humiliation. He had spent his life rising above this, proving himself, becoming someone who commanded respect. But here he was, reduced to a suspect, judged not by the court, but by prejudice. Officer Rhodes began patting him down, her movements rough, mechanical, stripped of any professionalism.
"We've had reports of car thieves in the area," she said, still eyeing him as if his guilt were obvious. "This vehicle matches one reported stolen last week." Isaiah gritted his teeth. "I already told you," he said through clenched jaw. "This car was purchased just a few days ago. If you'll just let me—" "Save it for the station," she snapped, reaching for her cuffs. Isaiah's heart pounded, each beat loud in his chest, but he forced his voice to remain calm, steady. "Officer Rhodes," he said firmly, "I suggest you call your superior before making a decision you'll regret." Her hand froze above the cuffs. She narrowed her eyes. "You expect me to believe that?" Isaiah met her gaze without flinching. "I expect you to verify my identity and do your job properly." For a moment, something shifted. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Her confidence faltered just slightly. With a frustrated sigh, she stepped back, reaching for her radio, still keeping her eyes locked on him. She muttered into the receiver, her voice low, her tone clipped. The minutes that followed stretched unbearably. Isaiah stood still, hands on the hood, the metal cold beneath his palms. Officer Rhodes kept pacing, her gaze darting between him and the static-filled radio. The silence between transmissions was louder than any siren. From the houses around them, eyes watched behind curtains. Whispers filled the air, thick with judgment. He felt exposed, stripped bare in the very place he called home. Then, finally, the radio crackled to life. "Rhodes, stand down immediately. Judge Carr is a respected member of this community. I'm on my way." Isaiah slowly straightened, relief washing over him, cold and bittersweet. But the damage was done. The moment had already etched itself in the minds of his neighbors and in the pit of his own pride. He had done everything right, and still, his dignity had been tarnished, and no amount of apologies could undo the humiliation he'd just endured. Officer Rhodes's face flushed with embarrassment as she lowered her radio. She hesitated, then muttered, "I'm sorry, Your Honor. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Isaiah adjusted his jacket, reclaiming his composure, though the anger still simmered quietly beneath the surface. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice calm but unwavering. "That's what we're calling racial profiling now, officer?" Before she could respond, another cruiser pulled up. A tall man with graying hair stepped out, Captain Reynolds, head of the local precinct. He approached quickly, his expression tense with concern. "Judge Carr," he said, voice low and apologetic, "I can't begin to express how sorry I am for this incident. Rest assured, we will get to the bottom of it." Isaiah gave a small nod, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. This wasn't just about him. It never was. It was about the countless others, the ones who didn't wear a robe, didn't have a title, didn't have anyone coming to vouch for them. He had been profiled in his own neighborhood, driving his own car after a long day of serving justice. And now, with the weight of that realization, he made a decision, one that would change more than just his own path. "Captain," Isaiah said, his voice steady, his presence commanding, "I'd like to speak with you and Officer Rhodes, not as a victim, but as someone who believes this can become an opportunity for real change." Captain Reynolds looked momentarily taken aback by the request, but there was something else in his eyes now. Respect. "Of course, Your Honor, whatever you need." Isaiah nodded, his gaze drifting across the neighborhood, the quiet street, the neatly kept lawns, the houses where curtains still fluttered shut, where eyes had watched but mouths had stayed silent. He had worked too hard for this, too long, to be reduced to a suspect, to be seen not as a man, not as a judge, but as a threat. And yet, he also knew this moment could become something more,
something meaningful, a catalyst for growth, for reckoning, for change. As they walked toward Captain Reynolds' car, Isaiah couldn't shake the thought. Could this humiliation, this public stripping of dignity, be the beginning of something bigger? Could it spark real conversations about the system, about justice, about what it means to be seen, truly seen, beyond skin color, beyond bias? Little did he know, this was just the beginning, a journey that would test everything he believed about justice, prejudice, and the power one person has to shift the tide. Later that evening, Isaiah stood in his home, the soft glow of familiar lamps, the warm stillness of the walls he'd built his life within. None of it brought him peace, not tonight. The encounter with Officer Rhodes played on a loop in his mind. Every word, every look, every command laced with doubt and control. It echoed like a warning. Justice wasn't just something handed down in courtrooms. It had to be demanded, defended, lived. And maybe that's where his next fight would begin. He knew this wasn't a one-time incident. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just about one officer. This was part of something larger, a system he thought he understood, one he had served faithfully for years. But now he saw it differently. Now he realized he was entangled in it, not just as a judge, but as a target, for better or worse. Just then, his wife Denise entered the room. She paused at the doorway, sensing the tension in his posture before he said a word. "Isaiah," she asked gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" She knew him too well. She could always read the storm beneath his calm exterior. He sighed, long and heavy, rubbing his temples like he could press the weight away. "You won't believe what happened today," he said, his voice weary. "I was pulled over, accused of stealing my own car." Denise's eyes widened, disbelief spreading across her face. "What? You? Here? In Winterdale?" He nodded. "Yeah, by one of our own, Officer Rhodes. She made me get out, put my hands on the hood, the whole humiliating drill. The neighbors watched, curtains moving, but not one person stepped out, not one word, not one soul." Denise's expression hardened. Her concern turned quickly to anger. "Isaiah, this is unacceptable. You're a judge. They know you." Isaiah looked up at her, his voice low, but edged with fire. "And that's exactly the problem. It doesn't matter who I am, what I've done, what I've achieved." He paused, eyes distant, voice heavy with truth. "In their eyes, I was still just a black man in a nice car. I was just another black man," Isaiah said quietly, "driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood." He looked at Denise, the weight heavy in his eyes. "If it can happen to me, what does that say for everyone else? People without the same resources, without the same protection?" Denise shook her head, frustration flashing across her face. "This is ridiculous. Something has to change." Isaiah walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawns, the neat rows of parked cars, the still, silent neighborhood. "I talked to the captain afterward," he said, his voice low. "Suggested a program, something to help officers understand what it's like for us, on the other side of the badge. But it's not enough." Denise stepped closer, her voice softening with concern. "What are you going to do?" Isaiah turned to face her. His jaw was set, his eyes resolute. "I'm going to use this. I have to. I can't let this moment pass like all the others. We've been silent, patient, complacent for too long. I want to sit down with Officer Rhodes, with the entire precinct, and show them what real justice looks like. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been overlooked, mistreated, or dismissed." Denise offered a faint smile, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. "I know you will," she said softly. "But be careful, Isaiah. These things, they don't change overnight. You'll be pushing against decades of resistance." Isaiah nodded, fully aware of the truth in Denise's words. "That's why it has to start now," he said quietly. The following week, Isaiah stood in a conference room at the Winterdale Police Department. Rows of uniformed officers sat before him, the air thick with tension. Like something unspoken lingered just beneath the surface. too heavy to ignore. Officer Rhodes sat among them, her face unreadable, but Isaiah could see the flickers, discomfort, warring with defiance. She wasn't sure yet whether to admit fault or double down on the assumptions she'd made. At the back of the room, Captain Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but focused, watching Isaiah closely. Isaiah took a breath, then stepped forward and spoke, his voice calm, clear, unwavering. "I'm not here to lecture anyone," he began. "I'm here because something has to change." A beat of silence. Then he continued. "Last week I was pulled over by one of your officers. Not for speeding, not for reckless driving, but because I was driving a nice car in a neighborhood where, apparently, I didn't look like I belonged." Silence filled the room like fog. Thick, heavy, uncomfortable. A few officers shifted in their seats. Some exchanged glances. Others avoided eye contact altogether. One or two glanced toward Rhodes. But she kept her eyes locked forward, her jaw clenched, her face a carefully guarded mask of indifference. Isaiah paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them feel it, to make them listen. "I've spent my entire career working to uphold the law," Isaiah continued. "I've sat in courtrooms day after day watching lives change with a single decision. I've done everything in my power to ensure that justice is served, fairly, impartially." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But last week, I was reminded that no matter how far you climb, no matter what title you hold, there are some battles you still can't escape." His gaze swept slowly across the room, meeting the eyes of each officer, one by one. Some looked back. Others shifted, uncomfortable, but Isaiah didn't flinch. "This isn't about me," he said firmly. "It's about the system. It's about how we see each other and the assumptions we make when someone like me is behind the wheel of a nice car." He noticed a few subtle nods now, cracks forming in the wall of resistance. But most of the room remained still, guarded. "We can't change everything overnight," he said, echoing the words Denise had spoken just days earlier. "But we can start somewhere. We can start with conversations like this, by challenging those quiet, unspoken biases, by understanding that every time you make a decision based on fear or assumption, you're not just hurting one person, you're damaging the community, undermining the justice system, and eroding the trust that should exist between us." The room was silent until Officer Rhodes shifted in her chair. She cleared her throat and finally spoke, her voice tight, stiff. "I was just doing my job, sir," she said. "We had reports of a stolen car, and yours matched the description." Isaiah held her gaze. "I understand the need to follow procedure," he replied, his voice even. "But when following protocol becomes an excuse to treat someone as guilty before asking a single question, that's not just a mistake, that's a failure of judgment. And it's exactly the kind of failure we have to address." Isaiah nodded, his expression steady, calm. "I understand that, officer, but when I told you who I was, when I offered to show you proof, you didn't listen, you assumed I was lying." His tone sharpened just slightly, not with anger, but with truth. "That's the problem. It's not just about following orders, it's about recognizing when those orders or your instincts are flawed." Silence settled over the room again, heavy and undeniable. His words landed like a mirror held up to the entire department. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his voice softer now, measured. "We've all seen it, Judge Carr. We know the biases are there. But the real question is, what do we do about them?" Isaiah met his eyes without hesitation. "We start," he said, "by acknowledging they exist. Then we work, together, to dismantle them." A low murmur rippled through the room, nods, shifting postures. And for the first time since walking into that conference room, Isaiah felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Weeks passed. The tension from that day slowly began to fade, not disappear, but ease. Isaiah followed through on a promise he'd made. He invited Officer Rhodes to shadow him in his courtroom, a chance to see what justice looked like from his side of the bench. To his surprise, she accepted. It wasn't easy. Her demeanor remained guarded, her posture stiff, professional, walls still up. But Isaiah was patient. He didn't expect change overnight. Then, one afternoon, she sat quietly through a particularly difficult hearing. a case involving a young black man falsely accused of assault. She watched Isaiah listen, guide, question, push back. She watched the weight of the system hang in the air like a verdict before justice finally broke through. And something in her eyes shifted. Rhodes finally broke the silence. "I never realized how much of this is out of their control," she said quietly, standing beside Isaiah after the courtroom had emptied. Isaiah turned to her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "What do you mean?" She exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly as if she'd been holding something in for years. "I mean, you hear things at the station. You see people brought in and booked. You start to make assumptions, who they are, what they've done. It becomes routine. We're trained to follow protocols, but we're not trained to understand what happens after the arrest. I've been sitting here, watching you, watching people's lives get torn apart by a system that's supposed to protect them. It's different when you see it up close." Isaiah nodded slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "It's different when you live it." Rhodes looked down, her jaw tightening. "I'm sorry for what happened that day," she said. And for the first time, it sounded real. No defensiveness, no formality, just truth. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He could feel the struggle in her, the beginning of unlearning, the painful process of seeing the system, not from the center, but from the edges. "Apologies are a good start," he said at last. "But what really matters is what you do next." Rhodes nodded, slowly, deliberately. "I know," she said, "and I want to do better. I want to understand." Isaiah smiled, a small, sincere flicker of hope sparking in his chest. "That's all I can ask for," he said quietly. A month later, Winterdale was making national headlines. The story? Apex Builders, a well-known local contractor, have been exposed for operating dangerously unsafe construction sites and bribing city officials to look the other way. That alone was newsworthy. But what made it explosive was the involvement of high-ranking officers within the Winterdale Police Department. Some had been complicit in covering up violations, altering reports, and protecting Apex's interests in exchange for cash, favors, and promotions. Isaiah had heard whispers. He'd been presiding over a few small cases tied to the company. At first, the details didn't add up, but now it all made sense. The full scope of the corruption, however, didn't hit him until late one evening, when his phone buzzed with a message from Detective Aaron Shaw, a seasoned investigator and trusted friend. "We need to talk. Urgent." They met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Only a few patrons remained, hunched over coffee, the soft clink of silverware filling the still air. Aaron slid into the booth across from Isaiah, his face lined with exhaustion and unease. "What's going on?" Isaiah asked, his voice low, cautious. Aaron glanced around, then leaned in, his tone barely above a whisper. "Apex is in deep, real deep, and it's not just bad construction. We're talking bribes, falsified inspection reports, fake permits, ghost safety checks." Isaiah's brow furrowed. "How far does it go?" Aaron hesitated, then spoke the words Isaiah hoped he'd misheard. "I think the chief's involved, maybe even the mayor." Isaiah leaned back, the chill settling in his spine. This wasn't just a case of a few dirty hands, this was systemic. It reached deep into the power structure. He thought he understood. Winterdale wasn't broken, it was rotting from within. Aaron continued, his voice tense and low. "They've been trying to silence people. Some of the officers involved have been burying complaints, deleting reports, threatening whistleblowers. Now that the story's breaking, they're scrambling to cover their tracks." Isaiah leaned back in his seat, the full weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. "Because you're the only one I trust," Aaron said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And because I need your help. You're in a position to do something, to make sure the truth actually comes out." Isaiah nodded slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities and consequences. If Aaron was right, if the corruption reached all the way to the chief, maybe even the mayor, this wasn't just a scandal. It was a direct threat to the community's trust in every level of leadership. "All right," Isaiah said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help. But we have to be careful. If they're willing to bury this much, they won't hesitate to come after anyone who gets in their way." Aaron nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we need to move fast." Over the next few days, Isaiah worked in silence. He combed through old court records, reopened closed complaints, and reviewed cases dismissed without proper cause. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Falsified inspection reports, bribes disguised as consulting fees, unrecorded payments, late-night meetings between Apex executives and department brass. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate, strategic. A web of power, control, and unchecked authority built to protect itself at any cost. Late one night, Isaiah sat hunched over his desk in his home office, papers spread across every surface, his laptop glowing in the dark. The walls seemed to press in around him, the silence almost too loud. His eyes burned from hours of reading, his jaw was tight, but his resolve had never been clearer. This was no longer just about what happened to him. It was about everyone who had been silenced. Everyone who had been crushed beneath the weight of a system that protected power over people. And Isaiah Carr, a judge, a black man, a survivor of that very system, was about to hold it accountable. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Aaron. "They know. Be careful." Isaiah's pulse quickened. He had known this was a possibility, that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous this would become. But seeing those words in black and white made it chillingly real. He stared at the screen, the message burning into his thoughts. They know. Be careful. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, the silence of the house pressing in around him like a weight. Outside, the wind stirred. The branches of the old oak tree in the front yard swayed, its leaves rustling softly, a peaceful sound that sharply contrasted the storm building in his life. He had to be smart now. This wasn't just about his reputation anymore. It was about his life. The evidence he'd collected, the connections between... Aaron's warning made one thing terrifyingly clear. They were out of time. And Isaiah was no longer just investigating. He was being watched. He glanced at the clock, just past midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling floorboards filled the space around him. Denise had gone to bed hours ago, but Isaiah couldn't sleep. Not now. His mind raced, running through every file he'd reviewed, every person he might have unknowingly implicated, and every move he needed to make before they made theirs. He needed more evidence, something irrefutable, something that would blow this entire thing wide open. But he couldn't do it alone. Not anymore. He needed people he could trust, people who wouldn't fold when things got messy, and he knew exactly who to call. The next morning, Isaiah met Aaron in a small park on the outskirts of town. The early sun stretched long shadows across the grass. The air was crisp, tinged with the quiet edge of early fall. Leaves rustled beneath their feet as Isaiah approached. Aaron was already there, pacing beside a bench, his brow furrowed, shoulders tense. "Thanks for coming," he said quickly, gripping Isaiah's hand in a firm shake as they sat. "I don't have much time, but we need to talk strategy." Isaiah nodded, his eyes scanning the park. Joggers passed. A dog barked in the distance, but he remained alert. "How bad is it?" "Worse than I thought," Aaron muttered, raking a hand through his hair. "I've been laying low, but word is, they're on to us." They've started watching me too. Isaiah leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we need to move. We need the internal police records, everything tied to Apex. Inspection reports, internal memos, email chains, disciplinary actions, phone logs, all of it. If we don't get real evidence, they'll bury us before we even speak. Aaron nodded. I've been trying, quietly. There's a way into the department's database, but it's a narrow window. And if anyone catches wind of it, it's over, for both of us. Isaiah sighed, rubbing his temples. The weight of it all pressed down, but turning back was no longer an option. Too many lives had been affected, too many voices silenced, too many truths buried. He looked Aaron in the eye. Then let's be smart about this, he said. No hero moves, no shortcuts. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Aaron nodded slowly. Agreed. We'll keep our circle small, Isaiah said. You, me, and maybe one or two more people we can trust. We gather everything. Emails, reports, records, and once we have it, we go public. The media, the Attorney General's office, someone outside of Winterdale, someone who can't be bought. Aaron nodded, his jaw tight with resolve.
The evidence he'd collected, the connections between Apex and the department, the falsified reports, the buried complaints, it was damning, and the people he was threatening weren't going to sit back and watch.
I'll start tonight, but we need to be ready for anything, Isaiah. If they find out we're taking this outside, they'll come after us with everything they've got. Isaiah's expression hardened. I know, but they won't scare us off. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and long shadows crept across the quiet streets of Winterdale, Isaiah sat at the kitchen table with Denise. He told her everything. No more half-truths, no more protecting her from the storm that had already begun. She listened in silence, her arms folded, her eyes growing darker with every detail. When he finished, she shook her head slowly, disbelief clouding her features. Isaiah, this is dangerous. These people are powerful. What if they try to hurt you? I can't back down now, he said gently. If I don't do this, who will? You've seen what they've done to this town, to people who don't have a voice. They're ruining lives, Denise, and no one's holding them accountable. Denise took a long, shaky breath. Her eyes shimmered with a mix of fear and pride. Just promise me you'll be careful. You have a family, Isaiah. We need you. He reached across the table, took her hand in his, and gave it a quiet squeeze. I promise, he said, and he meant it. The following week passed in a blur. Covert meetings in parking garages, encrypted phone calls late into the night, and files passed hand to hand like secrets in the dark. Isaiah moved carefully, every step measured, every name checked twice. The truth was dangerous now, but it was almost ready to see the light. Isaiah and Aaron worked tirelessly, careful not to draw unwanted attention. They combed through case files, reviewed court documents, and quietly reached out to a handful of trusted contacts, people with inside knowledge of Apex builders. Every new detail added another layer to the rotten foundation beneath Winterdale. High-ranking officers had been accepting kickbacks, overlooking violations, falsifying safety reports, and letting Apex cut corners, even when it put workers and residents at risk. And all the while, the town slept, unaware that those sworn to protect them were selling them out piece by piece. Isaiah knew they were sitting on a powder keg, and with every file, every signature, every timestamp, the fuse got shorter. But he was ready. He had spent his life defending the law. Now he would use that law to take down those who had perverted it. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind dark clouds, Isaiah's phone rang. Aaron. I've got it, he said, his voice low, urgent. All of it. The records, payments, emails, call logs, everything. There's no denying it now. Isaiah felt a jolt of adrenaline shoot through him. Where are you? I'm at the station, Aaron said. I'm printing everything out now. Meet me at the diner in 30 minutes. Isaiah hung up the phone, his heart pounding. This was it. They finally had what they needed.
With the evidence Aaron had uncovered, they could blow everything wide open, expose the corruption, name names, bring justice. But as he grabbed his keys and stepped out into the night, a heavy knot twisted in his stomach. A quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered, "Something's wrong." The diner was nearly empty when Isaiah arrived. Muted neon lights buzzed faintly outside, casting a pale glow across the rain-slicked parking lot. Inside, the booth sat in tired silence. A waitress behind the counter gave him a nod of recognition, then turned back to wiping down menus. Isaiah chose a booth near the back, positioned to watch both the entrance and the parking lot. His phone buzzed. "Aaron, on my way. 5 minutes." Isaiah nodded to himself, tapping his fingers anxiously on the table. The air inside the diner felt heavy. Too still, too quiet. The old clock above the kitchen door ticked loudly, each second dragging longer than the last. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Still no sign of Aaron. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. Another message from Aaron. But this one stopped his breath cold. "They're onto me! Get out!" Isaiah froze. His eyes darted to the parking lot, empty. Then, the bell above the diner door jingled. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, their gazes sweeping the room and locking straight onto him. They didn't look like locals. Clean-cut, dark suits, no hesitation. And the way they moved, with precision and intent, told Isaiah everything he needed to know. He was in danger. Isaiah stood up, heart thudding hard in his chest. The men closed the distance with calm, calculated steps. "Judge Carr," one of them said, his voice cool and commanding. "We need to have a word." Isaiah took a step back, every instinct screaming. He knew exactly what they wanted, and he wasn't going to let them silence him, not tonight. Without a word, he turned and bolted, his footsteps echoing off the diner's tile floor as the 2 men shouted behind him. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He slammed through the back door, bursting into the alley, cool night air slapping him across the face as he sprinted toward the street. His car was just around the corner. Almost there. He reached for the handle, and a hand clamped down hard on his shoulder, yanking him back. Isaiah spun, fists up, ready to fight, but a voice cut through the panic. "Isaiah, it's me. Aaron." His face was pale, drenched in sweat, eyes wild. "We've got to go, now." Isaiah didn't ask questions. He dove into the driver's seat as Aaron slid in beside him, slamming the door shut just as the back alley burst open. "They know everything," Aaron panted, glancing frantically out the rear window. "Emails, logs, how we got them. We don't have much time. We've been compromised." Isaiah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His voice was low, steady, but beneath it, pure tension.
"What do we do now?"
Aaron looked over, desperation etched across his face.
"We go public. Tonight."
Isaiah didn't respond. He just drove. The city lights streaked past in a blur, the roads almost empty at this late hour. Both men sat in silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and Aaron's uneven breath as he clutched the folder of evidence against his chest.
"This is it,"
Aaron said quietly, as if trying to convince himself as much as Isaiah.
"Once we get this out there, there's no turning back."
Isaiah's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the road.
"I know, but we're out of time. If we don't do this now, everything we've uncovered disappears."
They pulled into the parking lot of the local news station just after midnight. The building loomed ahead, dark and still, except for a few scattered windows glowing faintly, where overnight staff prepped for the late broadcast. Inside, they were buzzed through the glass doors by a sleepy-eyed security guard who barely glanced at their IDs before waving them on. Down a quiet hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, they were directed to Studio 3, where the late-night news team was finishing a segment. A woman in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and alert despite the hour, met them at the door. Her name tag read, Lisa Chen, producer. She gave them a skeptical once-over.
"A judge and a detective at midnight? This better be good."
Isaiah stepped forward, voice firm.
"We have documented evidence of widespread corruption within the Winterdale Police Department, city contractors, and members of local government."
Lisa blinked, her expression hardening.
"I hope you brought proof?"
Aaron opened the folder. Names, transactions, falsified reports, emails, payoffs, everything. And we're out of time. They know we're coming. Lisa's eyes flicked over the first few pages, and then she looked up, all skepticism gone.
"Follow me."
"We need to go on air now,"
Isaiah said, his voice unwavering. Lisa crossed her arms, unconvinced.
"You've got proof?"
Aaron stepped forward, hands trembling slightly as he held out the folder.
"Everything's in here. Names, dates, payments. It's all there." Lisa took the folder and flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly, then slowed, her brows furrowed. The more she read, the more her expression shifted, from skepticism to disbelief, and finally, grim understanding. She looked up at Isaiah, her voice low but sharp.
You realize what you're asking me to do, right? Once this airs, it's going to explode, and there will be fallout. For you, for your families, for this station.
Isaiah met her gaze, resolute.
We know, but letting this stay buried isn't an option.
Lisa turned back to the folder. She flipped a few more pages. Silence stretched thick between them. Each second felt like a test of resolve. Then finally, she snapped the folder shut. Okay, she said softly, a quiet nod. We'll do it. A breath escaped from Aaron's chest. Isaiah gave a tight nod of thanks. But they all knew this was just the beginning. The second this went live, the people behind Winterdale's corruption wouldn't sit quietly. They had power, reach, and no reason to play fair. Lisa motioned to the hallway. Follow me. She led them into the studio, where the late-night crew was setting up under harsh overhead lights. The anchor turned, surprised to see them. Lisa didn't waste time. Emergency broadcast, drop the filler stories. We've got something that can't wait. The air shifted. Everyone in the studio sensed it. Something big was coming. And it was about to go live. The anchor, a calm-faced man named Jeff Lawson, sat at his desk flipping through notes when Lisa approached. Jeff, she said, placing the thick folder in front of him. We're going live with this. Jeff glanced at the cover, then back at Lisa. Her tone told him everything. This is bigger than anything we've ever covered before. He opened the folder, his brow furrowing as he read the first few lines. Then his eyes shifted, first to Lisa, then to Isaiah and Aaron standing just behind her. His voice dropped. This is real? Isaiah nodded, steady and clear. Every word. And we need to tell the public before it's buried for good, Aaron added quietly. Jeff let out a long breath, then gave a single, resolute nod. All right, we go live. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The newsroom transformed. Producers shouted across the floor, directing camera angles and lighting adjustments. Technicians scrambled to prep graphics. Reporters paused mid-script, watching from the sidelines. Everyone knew something big was about to break. Isaiah and Aaron were ushered into makeup. Brushes dabbed at tired eyes, but no amount of powder could hide the weight behind their expressions. As Isaiah sat under the glaring lights, a quiet resolve settled over him. This was the moment, the point of no return. He wasn't afraid for himself anymore. He was afraid of what would happen if they stayed silent. The final countdown began. 60 seconds. Isaiah and Aaron were seated beside Jeff at the anchor desk, their reflections blinking back at them from monitors across the studio. The room buzzed with quiet urgency. 30 seconds. Isaiah's eyes locked with Aaron's. No words were exchanged, just a shared understanding. 20 seconds. Lisa stood just off camera, headset on, watching every detail. 10 seconds. The room fell still. The red light on camera 1 began to glow. They were live. Jeff Lawson took his place at the anchor desk, his face lit by the harsh studio lights. He shuffled his notes once, deliberately, then looked straight into the lens. The red light blinked on. In 5, 4, 3, the producer's voice faded behind the glass. Jeff's voice cut through the silence, calm, steady, and grave. Good evening. We interrupt your regular programming with a special report that may change the way you see our city. Isaiah sat still, the moment pressing in from all sides. No turning back now. Tonight, we bring you a story that will shake the very foundation of our community, Jeff continued. Corruption, bribery, the abuse of power at the highest levels of our local government and police department. The screen briefly displayed a graphic. Special report, Winterdale exposed. With me tonight are Judge Isaiah Carr and Detective Aaron Walker, two respected public servants who've uncovered a web of criminal activity that has gone unchecked for years. The camera slowly panned to Isaiah. He sat upright, his expression composed, voice clear and unwavering. What we've uncovered is a systemic failure of integrity and accountability, Isaiah began. Apex Builders, a local construction firm, has been involved in illegal operations for years, cutting corners, endangering lives, and paying off those sworn to protect this city. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Members of the Winterdale Police Department, including high-ranking officials, have accepted bribes to falsify reports, bury complaints, and intimidate whistleblowers. The camera cut to Aaron. He leaned forward slightly, urgency in his tone. We have documents, emails, financial records, evidence that proves this isn't just negligence. It's coordinated, intentional corruption. And it goes all the way to the top. Some of the names involved will shock you. Gasps echoed faintly from the newsroom crew watching nearby. Jeff turned back to the camera, his voice heavier now. We'll be presenting some of that evidence tonight, live on air. And tomorrow, this entire dossier will be submitted to the Attorney General's office. He paused, then looked between Isaiah and Aaron. Judge Carr, why come forward now? Isaiah glanced toward the lens, not at it, but through it, to the people of Winterdale. Because justice can't be selective, because the people of this city deserve to know the truth, and because silence in the face of corruption is complicity. Aaron elaborated from his seat beside Isaiah, his voice steady but urgent. We have evidence of direct payments made to officers. Bribes exchanged for silence, for turning a blind eye. This wasn't isolated, it was structured, intentional. The corruption runs deep, and the leadership within both the police department and city government has been complicit. Isaiah's pulse thudded in his ears as he took a slow breath. He could feel the enormity of the moment. Every word spoken now mattered. For too long, this corruption has gone unchecked, he said, locking eyes with the camera. But tonight we're bringing it to light. We have the documents, the proof, and we are sharing it with the public, not behind closed doors, not through filtered press releases. This is about justice, about accountability, about restoring the trust this community deserves. The broadcast lasted just under 30 minutes. But when the cameras cut and the red light blinked off, the silence in the studio was gone, replaced with the frenzied hum of ringing phones, frantic producers, and breaking news alerts. Social media feeds lit up like wildfire. Hashtag Winterdale Exposed trended within minutes. Citizens were outraged. Journalists were already calling for follow-ups. Law firms, advocacy groups, and even federal offices were beginning to reach out. Isaiah stood at the edge of the studio floor, still processing it all when he felt the familiar buzz of his phone. He pulled it from his pocket. One new message. Unknown number. You shouldn't have done that. Now you've made it personal. His fingers curled tightly around the phone. His stomach dropped. The words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. Aaron stepped beside him, catching the tension in his face. What is it? Isaiah handed him the phone silently. Aaron read the message and exhaled through his nose, jaw tightening. They're rattled. Isaiah nodded. They're cornered, and that's when they're most dangerous. While their empire crumbled, Isaiah knew the fallout wouldn't be silent. They would come, for him, for Aaron, for anyone who had dared to pull back the curtain. The fight was far from over. He turned the phone screen toward Aaron. Aaron's jaw clenched as he read the message. His eyes darkened. They're coming. Isaiah nodded, his voice low but unwavering. We need to be ready. What followed was chaos. The broadcast spread like wildfire, beyond Winterdale, beyond county lines. News anchors across the state repeated their names, looping the evidence on nightly broadcasts. By morning, protests had broken out in front of the police department and city hall. Cardboard signs, chants for accountability. The community was awake now, but so were the enemies they'd exposed. Isaiah and Aaron became unwilling public figures, faces of resistance, symbols of justice. With that came something else, danger. The threats were relentless. Blocked numbers, hateful voicemails, unmarked cars parked just long enough to make a point, then disappear. Isaiah had prepared for backlash, but not for Denise waking up to check every lock on the windows. Not for his daughter asking why a man with a camera was across the street again. Not for the way even silence felt louder now. That night, Isaiah sat across from Denise at the kitchen table. Dinner sat untouched, growing cold between them. Her voice was quiet, but firm.
You need to go to the police.
Isaiah looked up, exhausted. I can't, he said, shaking his head. They're part of this. Denise's hands gripped her glass a little tighter. She tried to stay strong, but he could see it. The way her eyes lingered on every shadow in the room. The way her smile had disappeared beneath the worry.
Then who do we go to?
She asked softly. Isaiah didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he knew this. They hadn't come this far to be silenced. And he wasn't going to let fear write the ending. We can't trust anyone on the inside, Isaiah said. Denise sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her glass of water.
So what do we do?
Isaiah clenched his fists.
We stay strong. We keep pushing. We've exposed them, and now they're scared. They want us to back down, but we can't.
Tears welled in Denise's eyes. She reached across the table, her fingers finding his.
I just don't want to lose you, Isaiah. Promise me you'll be careful.
He squeezed her hand, gently but firmly.
I promise.
But even as he said it, a part of him knew. Some promises were harder to keep than others. Meanwhile, Aaron had taken to laying low in a motel on the outskirts of town, far from the eyes of anyone who might be watching. The walls were thin, the mattress lumpy, and the lock on the door looked like it hadn't seen a replacement since the 90s. But it was safe, quiet, hidden, for now. He knew they had kicked a hornet's nest, and the hornets were circling. Late one night, as he sat in the dark flipping through pages of case files, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His stomach turned. He answered anyway. Aaron, it's Lisa Chen, came the voice on the other end, tight, urgent. I just got word from one of my sources. There's a warrant out for your arrest. Aaron froze. What? For what? Tampering with evidence, an old case. They're pulling strings to make it look legitimate. Aaron rubbed his temple, already feeling the noose tightening. It's a setup, Lisa continued. They're moving fast. If I heard about it, they're already en route. Aaron exhaled sharply, the motel room suddenly feeling smaller. Thanks, Lisa. I owe you one. No, she said. You owe me the truth. Get out of there, now. The call ended. Aaron stared at the phone for a second longer, then snapped into motion. He knew exactly what this was. They couldn't beat him in the light, so they were coming for him in the dark. I'll figure something out, Aaron said, his voice tight. He ended the call, heart hammering in his chest. They were closing in, fast, and if he didn't act now, it would be too late. He wouldn't let them win. Not now. Not after everything they'd uncovered.
Aaron shoved his few belongings into a backpack, grabbed the folder of backup evidence, and slipped out of the motel room. The hallway was silent, the parking lot outside bathed in the pale gray of early morning. His eyes scanned the lot. No black SUVs, no shadowy figures. Not yet. He moved fast, ducking low between parked cars, adrenaline humming beneath his skin. He didn't know where he'd go next, only that he had to stay ahead. The next morning, Isaiah's phone rang. He answered on the first buzz. Aaron? They're after me, came the strained reply. Aaron's voice was ragged with exhaustion. There's a warrant out, tampering with evidence. Isaiah's stomach dropped. That's a lie. Of course it is. They're fabricating charges, trying to erase me from the picture. Isaiah stood by the window, his knuckles white around the phone. Outside, the town looked unchanged, quiet, unsuspecting, but everything had shifted beneath the surface. Where are you? On the move? I can't stay in one place too long, but Isaiah, this is more than just threats now. They're trying to make us disappear, to bury the truth before it buries them. Isaiah took a breath, already turning gears in his mind. Then we need to hit back, but not alone. We need someone with real reach, someone who can take this to the top, state level or higher. A long silence followed. Then Aaron's voice returned, lower now, cautious. I might know someone. Aaron's voice dropped to a near whisper. There's one more thing, Isaiah, something I didn't tell you before. Isaiah's brow furrowed. What is it? I got a tip from someone inside. This isn't just corruption. Apex Builders. They're part of something much bigger, and it's tied directly to the police department. Isaiah straightened, the back of his neck prickling. What are you saying? There's a network, Isaiah, a web of people who've been running this town from the shadows for years. Apex is just the storefront. The real power? It's the ones pulling the strings behind them. Politicians, business leaders, law enforcement, maybe even people in the courts. Isaiah gripped the phone tighter, his mouth suddenly dry. Who's behind it? I don't know yet, Aaron said, but I'm working on it. I just need more time. Isaiah's thoughts raced. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a machine, a hidden hierarchy designed to control Winterdale and crush anyone who asked questions, and now they were in its crosshairs. Be careful, Aaron, Isaiah said, his voice grave.
If you're right, then we're in a lot deeper than we thought. I know, Aaron replied, but we're not backing down now. When the call ended, Isaiah stood in silence. The words echoed in his mind like a warning. This isn't just about corruption, it's about control.
And now Aaron was in hiding, hunted, with a fake warrant over his head. And Isaiah, he was about to go up against something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Isaiah stood in the center of the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long, fractured shadows along the walls. The house was quiet, but his thoughts were anything but. Denise stepped in, her movements gentle, as if not to disturb the storm she saw brewing in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly, concern etched into every word. Isaiah exhaled, running a weary hand over his face. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice low. "Aaron found more. Apex builders, they're just the surface. There's an entire network behind them, people who've been running this town from behind closed doors. They're powerful, Denise. They're hidden, and they're dangerous." Denise's eyes widened, her hand rising instinctively to her mouth. "Oh my God, Isaiah, what are you going to do?" He looked at her, the weight of the truth anchoring his shoulders, but his gaze was steady. "I don't know yet, but I can't back down. Not now." She stepped closer, gently taking his hands in hers. "You're not alone in this," she whispered. "I need you to remember that. Just be careful, please." Isaiah nodded, the fear pressing against his ribs, but resolve settling deeper in his bones. He pulled her into an embrace, grounding himself in her presence, drawing strength from the love that had always held him steady. This fight was far from over, but he wasn't walking into it alone, and he wouldn't stop, not until justice had a name and those in the shadows were forced into the light. The next morning, Isaiah sat alone in his office, his desk buried under stacks of documents and case files. The evidence was there, undeniable, damning, enough to expose the corruption in Winterdale. But after Aaron's latest discovery, everything felt different, more dangerous. The stakes were no longer confined to city politics. There were bigger players now, hidden in the shadows. People who wouldn't hesitate to bury the truth, along with anyone who got too close to it. Isaiah stared at the phone for a long moment before picking it up. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, one he'd kept saved for reasons like this. After a few rings, a familiar voice came through, casual and warm. "Isaiah Carr, long time." "Joseph," Isaiah said, wasting no time. "I need your help." The shift in Joseph's tone was immediate. "What's going on?" Isaiah kept his voice steady. "I've uncovered something serious. Corruption in the Winterdale PD. Bribes, falsified reports, cover-ups tied to a construction company called Apex Builders. But it goes deeper than that. There's a network of people behind it, influential people, and I need someone at the state level, someone I can trust." There was a long pause. Isaiah could almost hear the weight of his words being measured on the other end. "You're serious about this?" Joseph finally asked, his voice quiet, cautious. "I wouldn't be calling you if I wasn't." Another beat of silence. Then, "All right," Joseph said. "Send me everything you have. I'll look it over tonight. And Isaiah, if this is as big as you say, you're going to need more than evidence. You're going to need protection." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I know." And he did. Because bringing the truth into the light always came with a cost. But now, at least, he had one more ally. "But Isaiah, be careful," Joseph warned. "You're playing with fire." Isaiah nodded, his expression resolute. "I know, but this needs to be done." Days passed. The tension in Winterdale thickened like smoke. Outside the police station and city hall, protests swelled, voices rising, signs waving, the crowd demanding truth. The broadcast had ignited a firestorm, and there was no putting it out now. But with the momentum came danger. The threats became more pointed. Anonymous phone calls at all hours. Strange cars parked outside Isaiah's house. The feeling that he was being watched, always. With Aaron still in hiding, Isaiah carried the weight alone. He spent every waking hour combing through files, coordinating with Joseph, building the kind of airtight case that couldn't be buried or ignored. But the deeper they went,
the more dangerous it became. One evening, just after sunset, Isaiah exited the courthouse. The air was cool, quiet, too quiet. As he approached his car, a black SUV glided to a stop beside him. Its windows were tinted, unreadable. One of them slowly rolled down. Inside sat a man in a tailored suit, his expression smooth, his eyes sharp and lifeless. "Judge Carr?" the man said, voice like silk over a blade. "A word of advice. Walk away while you still can." Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. "I'm not walking away." The man offered a thin smile. "No? That's unfortunate. You're making this personal." Isaiah's fists clenched. "This isn't personal. It's justice. And I'm not afraid of you." The man's smile vanished. His eyes turned to ice. "You should be." Then, without another word, the window rolled up. The SUV pulled away, its taillights fading into the darkness. Isaiah stood alone under the dim street lamp, his pulse racing, the warning still ringing in his ears, but his resolve burning hotter than ever. Isaiah knew he couldn't wait any longer. The people behind Apex Builders weren't going to let this go quietly, and now they'd made it personal. He had to act fast. That night, he met with Joseph and Lisa Chin in a small conference room above the news station. The table was buried in documents, maps, and highlighted reports, evidence painstakingly gathered over weeks. "We have everything we need," Joseph said, his voice steady. "The evidence is airtight. We'll take this to the State Attorney General's office first thing tomorrow. Once this goes public, there's no going back." Isaiah nodded, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. "Let's do it." Just as they began packing up, Isaiah's phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. "I've got the final piece. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. Come alone." Isaiah's stomach clenched. The old warehouse on 5th Street was abandoned, a crumbling shell on the edge of town, not the kind of place you'd choose for a midnight meeting unless you had no other choice. He showed the message to Joseph and Lisa. "Aaron says he's got the last piece. He wants to meet, tonight." Joseph frowned. That could be a trap. Isaiah shook his head. "No, it's Aaron. I trust him." Lisa looked between them, her face tight with concern. "Then we're going with you, but we stay sharp." Just before midnight, the three of them arrived at the warehouse. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows shattered, its walls tagged with fading graffiti. A rusted chain hung loose on the gate, swaying in the wind. The street was empty. Too empty. Isaiah stepped forward, every instinct on edge. The wind howled through the cracked walls, whispering warnings no one wanted to say aloud. "Let's be quick," Joseph murmured. "And if anything feels off, we walk." Isaiah nodded. Then, without another word, he pushed open the door and stepped into the shadows. They parked the car a few blocks away and approached the warehouse on foot, their footsteps sharp against the cracked pavement. Isaiah's heartbeat thudded in his ears as they neared the looming structure, swallowed by darkness. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. "Aaron?" Isaiah called out, his voice echoing against the hollow walls. For a moment, nothing, just the sound of wind rattling through broken windows. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was Aaron. He looked pale, tense, and worn down. In his hand, he clutched a weathered folder. His eyes darted around like he expected someone, or something, to jump out of the dark. "I've got it," Aaron said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the final piece, the link between Apex and the department. Names, transfers, all of it." Relief surged through Isaiah's chest. "Let me see." But before Aaron could hand over the folder, the sound of footsteps rang out, slow, deliberate, echoing from the far end of the building. Isaiah spun toward the entrance. A group of men stepped out of the shadows. Dark suits, cold expressions. The same men who had cornered him outside the courthouse. "You should have listened, Judge Carr," one of them said, his tone slick and venomous. Isaiah instinctively moved in front of Aaron, shielding him. "You're too late," Isaiah said, trying to steady his voice. The truth's already out. The man smiled, but his eyes stayed dead. Is that what you think? We'll see about that, the man sneered. Before Isaiah could react, one of the men lunged at Aaron, yanking the folder from his hands. Aaron resisted, fists clenching the documents, but he was outnumbered and overpowered. The folder tore open, papers fluttering to the ground like broken feathers. "Hey!" Isaiah shouted, charging forward, but a solid fist met his chest, slamming him against the cold concrete wall. Pain shot through his shoulder. "Enough," the man barked. "You've caused enough trouble." Just as the men turned to flee, a sudden wail of sirens split the night air. Blue and red lights spilled through the shattered windows like fire. The men froze. "Drop it!" a voice boomed. Lisa Chen stood silhouetted in the warehouse doorway, a police officer at her side, weapon drawn and steady. The thugs hesitated, caught between fight and flight. But one by one, they dropped the folder and raised their hands. Isaiah's breath came fast as backup officers surged in, cuffing the men and leading them out under the glare of flashing lights. He scrambled over to Aaron, helping him up. "You okay?" he asked, voice taut with concern. Aaron winced, brushing dust off his sleeves. "Yeah, barely." Isaiah looked at the scattered papers, still intact. He let out a shaky breath. "We did it." Fallout came fast. The evidence was irrefutable. Within days, Apex builders collapsed. Arrests were made. High-ranking officers and city officials were dragged into courtrooms they once commanded. The town of Winterdale, long suffocated by silence, was finally forced to breathe. And for the first time in years, justice had a voice. People began to understand just how deep the corruption had gone. Isaiah and Aaron were hailed as heroes, though neither of them felt heroic. They hadn't done it for the praise. They had done it because it was right. But the cost had been high. They had risked their reputations, their safety, and in some ways, their peace of mind. Justice had been served, yes, but the scars would stay. And yet, something had changed. There was hope now. Hope that the town could rebuild, hope that the system might be reformed, hope that the next generation would inherit something stronger than silence. A few weeks later, Isaiah stood on the courthouse steps, staring out at the town he had fought so hard to protect. The morning air was cool, and the sun was rising slowly, casting a soft gold across Winterdale's streets. Denise stepped beside him, her hand slipping gently into his.
"How do you feel?" she asked. Isaiah took a long breath, the moment washing over him. "Like we're just getting started." They stood there in silence, the past still lingering, but no longer defining them. There was peace now, and purpose. Isaiah had always believed in the law, believed that justice, though imperfect, was worth fighting for. And as the sun climbed higher, he knew it had been worth it. Because in the end, justice had prevailed, and that was enough.